I think you're muted, Jerica.
Oh, sorry about that.
There you go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second Tech in the City webinar. This series will focus on how people move, plan, and engage in the new urban technology age. Today's guest, Elizabeth Delmelle, will give examples on how text and natural language processing methods can serve to complement traditional forms of quantitative spatial data and provide insight into urban processes. My name is Jerica Logan, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator at the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis, otherwise known as CURA. I will be your host for this event. If you require closed captioning, you will find a box at the bottom of the screen called CC. Click this box and select Show Subtitles. This will allow you to see the subtitles during the presentation. Please feel free to submit questions at any time of the webinar in the Q&A box. We will ask as many of your questions as we can in the last portion of the presentation. And if we do not get to your question, we do apologize. If you have any additional questions following this event, please feel free to email me at logan.433@osu.edu. This event is also approved for one AICP CM. To claim your CM credits, log into your My APA account on the APA website and enter in the event on your online CM event log. There will also be a brief survey at the end of this webinar. If you have time, please provide your feedback. I am now going to pass it over to our director, Harvey Miller.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is part of CURA's regular series on the issues and challenges facing the cities and regions in Ohio and beyond. I want to talk about, before we get started today, our next webinar, which will be on December 2nd at noon. And our next webinar will be the final one for the semester, and it'll be a panel discussion about improving public participation in planning. Last year, senior members of the private sector planning firms, Nelson Nygaard, Sam Schwartz, and Connect the Dots Insights, published a manifesto at planetizen.com. It's titled, It's Time for Public Participation to Evolve with Transportation Planning. And there's a link to that paper at our event website for December 2nd. In this paper, in this article, they threw down a gauntlet for the professional planning community to elevate public participation and suggested some paths forward. We'll talk to 4 of those authors on December 2nd at noon, and really don't miss this one. We've had some organizational meetings and activities with these guys, and they are very lively and have a lot of things to say on the topic. So really, you don't want to miss this one on December 2nd at noon. So please visit cura.osu.edu/events to learn about this and other future events. Sign up for our monthly newsletter at cura.osu.edu. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter while it lasts. And we're looking at Mastodon too, and Instagram. I think that'll be around for a while. Okay, so now I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Elizabeth Delmelle. She is an associate professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning at the University of Pennsylvania, where she also serves as the director of the Master of Urban Spatial Analytics program. Her research addresses issues related to neighborhood dynamics, urban transportation, residential choice decisions, and spatial inequities using spatial analytical methods. Her research embraces a diversity of data sources and methods, including geospatial approaches, machine learning, and traditional inferential statistics. Her research has sought to uncover and map the longitudinal pathways of neighborhood change, the role of public investments like transit in spurring processes of change, and how various urban amenities extracted from real estate advertisement text have contributed to changes in the residential sorting process. This is something we're going to hear about today, I believe. She also serves as the editor of the Journal of Transport Geography, a very well-regarded and impactful journal in transportation science. She earned her PhD from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte and spent 10 years on the faculty there before moving to Penn this year. And with that, you can take it away, Elizabeth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Harvey, and for inviting me to do this. So I'm excited to share some of our research. So I'm going to give an overview, and I'm going to try to cram in 3 different analyses into a 30 to 35 minute presentation. So in doing so, I've omitted some of the hard work and labor that really went into making this work, and you're going to get the sprinkles and the icing, the results of this. And so this is several years journey that I've been on with my research partner, Dr. And we've been the use of these real estate, literally the tech line, various natural language processing methods to try to find traditional forms of spatial analysis. So I'm going to set the framework here for policies. So much of our work is rooted into trying to understand what are the neighborhood change.
It appears we're having some Zoom trouble, Elizabeth. Maybe you could start again and maybe to keep the camera off. That might help.
Sure.
Sorry about that, folks.
So
it happens.
the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, start again.
Okay. Okay, hopefully you can see this better now. So as I was saying when I got cut off from the Zoom, I'm going to talk about 3 different studies where my research partners and I have been exploring the way that the text from real estate advertisements might tell us something about urban dynamics. So in order to squeeze in the results from our 3 different case studies, I've kind of omitted some of the hard work, labor, and the dirty work that went into this. You're just going to get the spring to set amenities in the resident process. So if we look at cities today, we know that there's a few things going on. We know that there's been, up until the pandemic, and probably even so, I mean, in Philadelphia, and we're still witnessing this now, which is that there's been an increased interest among younger, educated whites for vibrant, walkable urban spaces. So that's kind of been quantified, this back to the city movement, increased gentrification over the past. Result of that, or kind of in tangent to that, cities have embraced regional economic development policies that try to establish vibrant neighborhoods through various smart growth initiatives, which are aimed at attracting talent and population. Cities usually are trying to grow, and in order to attract people to their cities, they want to give them what they want. And what do people want? They want these cool and vibrant neighborhoods and cities. So at the same time, so as we see an increased demand for these kind of prime center city locations that have all of these urban amenities, we see that poverty has increasingly been suburbanizing, which brings about all kinds of challenges in trying to provide services. So that's kind of what we know is going on. And so one of the little pet peeves that Dr. Nielsen and I see is that a result of all of these dynamics, we see all of these papers that say that blank is the cause of gentrification. It could be parks, trains, bikes, scooters, breweries, sidewalks, what have you. So all of these things. But what reason why this kind of irks us is that we really believe that it's not one thing that can possibly cause gentrification. Because we know that location choices are not based on one factor. When you choose where to live, you're not just saying, well, they have a train. Never mind that there's high crime rates and poor schools, and the housing choices based on the bundle of amenities that are in an urban area, which might include a train, in conjunction with all of these other things. The other pet peeve is that unless you have longitudinal data or research design, you can't show causality. That we know. And we don't have great longitudinal data on the location of all the potential urban amenities that might spur these changes. And we don't know which ones are important because we're kind of stuck or limited to the types of spatial data that might be readily available. we might be missing what is important when give rise to these sorting patterns and neighborhood changes. And we also know that the residential profiles and amenities are changing together. So given all of this, we have been toying with the idea that potentially longitudinal data of property advertisements. So when you go to purchase a home, all of that text that's describing the characteristics of the home and the neighborhood could give us some unprecedented insight on what are the important urban and housing amenities and how do these change over time. And if we link these with things like who's moving in, so in our case, we link it with mortgage lending data and other sources, maybe we can tie together what amenities are important for who's moving in the advertisement. So that's sort of our mission. So we got started on this project of studies. We were looking at the impact of a new light rail line in Charlotte, North Carolina. We collected a whole bunch of Zillow advertisements. And one of the first things we did was just create a simple word cloud map. And when we created this map, as you can see from the word cloud, you can get a really clear sense in that particular neighborhood of what's going on. You can see words like light rail, breweries, uptown, new, greenway, bungalow, opportunity, construction, granite, walking, right? The skyline. So just from extracting kind of the keywords from these real estate listings, you can really get a sense that that neighborhood is going through a process of gentrification. And again, it's not one thing, it's all of these factors that are kind of describing that process. So that got us excited, and we've been on this pathway for a couple of years. So for the case study, I'm going to be talking about my former home place, which is Charlotte, North Carolina. And just to give you some context about Charlotte, it is the 7th fastest growing metro area in the US. So people are coming in from outside of the metropolitan statistical area. It draws people from New York City, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Miami, as well as other surrounding cities in North and South Carolina. It's always making the lists of cities where millennials are moving to, and so on. It also has this interesting history about the role of corporations, especially Bank of America, Duke Energy, in producing a gentrifiable space. So again, going back to the idea of smart growth strategies. So Bank of America was the first bank in the South to have international presence. And so when they opened a headquarters, he was living in the city center, tumbleweed going through it. But land was cheap and banking regulations made it very favorable for the bank to stay there. So they opened up a headquarters in London and said, oh, we need to compete with London and New York City in order to attract talent and workers. So we're going to invest a whole bunch of money into the city to make this more of an attractive place where bankers will want to come and work. So one of the more interesting stories of what they helped do was, because of giant urban renewal past, there was really no historic buildings in Charlotte. And they purchased old Victorian homes from outside of the city, and they brought them into the city to produce this gentrifiable space. They also were big backers of the new light rail, and funded things like burying the power lines to try to make this vibrant urban space. But that's really close to the city center. Beyond that, Charlotte is extremely auto-dominated. It's also usually ranked as one of the most sprawling metro areas. While we had all of these, because there was so much population growth, again, it's nice weather. So developers kind of had free reign over these. So it all the development blocks this in my old neighborhood to load, they're actually new. So we have those types of developments, and then we see that poverty has increasingly been suburbanizing into older suburban developments. So these are just some examples of the smart growth initiatives the city has been big headline
Apologize, everyone. We're obviously having problems with Zoom right now.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure where I got cut off.
You were talking about the sprawl in Charlotte.
Okay, not too far away.
And apologize, everyone. We just
Sorry for
we can't control Zoom, unfortunately.
This one?
We can't see it yet.
Does this slide look like where we were?
Oh, we can't see the slide yet. Jeez.
Sorry about this.
Oh yeah. Yeah, sorry everyone again. And our speaker, apologies.
How about, it's loading.
Okay.
Is this about where we were?
Yes, that's exactly,
Okay.
that's.
Sorry about this. Anyway, we'll just keep going and working through it. So as I was talking about, it's also, so in addition to these smart growth initiatives in the center city, it's also very sprawling, very car-centric with all different types of suburbs. And poverty has also been increasingly suburbanizing. So these are some of the examples of smart growth initiatives in the city. We have this bike light rail, single light rail line, and a trolley are some of the examples of these initiatives, again, also corporately backed. So this brought up some questions in the communities. We were studying the impact of that light rail on how it was impacting communities. And one of the things that residents brought up was that these are in the back into a talent. And it's just a set for us. And so that brought up one of these questions. Is that people who are moving from further, newcomers to the city, are they the ones moving into these newly nested, smart, vibrant neighborhoods? And so we acquired a couple of data sources. This was a new movers info group. And this is a change your address or you change your utility connection. They have a database that marks that you are a new mover. And then they sell this to advertisers. So you get bombarded with mail that says, welcome to the neighborhood. Here's where to go to the dentist and here's where to get as a subscription to this database. And so we helped ourselves to a couple of years worth of data. So we got 71,000 new movers into the city of Charlotte limits from November 2020 to 2022, which is obviously also during the pandemic. And what data we had is the address of where the person has moved and how far away they came from. Unfortunately, we don't know the exact origin. So if we just make a map, where are new movers in general moving to? We can see this map at the top shows that there's kind of a high concentration in this urban core, which is what we would expect. There's the most housing there. It's the densest. And then what we did was we wanted to look at neighborhoods where there is a relatively higher share of people coming from out of town. And we defined out of town, we tried it a couple ways, but here it's those coming from 200 miles or more, which is beyond the Charlotte MSA, compared to those moving less than 50 miles. So more people, relatively more people coming from further away than those who are moving within the metro area. And here we see a slightly different spatial pattern. We see comparatively fewer people in this crescent. So Charlotte is often dichotomized by it's called the wedge of wealth, which is down here, this particular wedge, in this crescent of poverty. So we see the new
Excuse me, Elizabeth, I'm sorry, we're
really less likely to go into that wedge and a little bit more likely to be in these outside areas. Yes.
Elizabeth, we're having some trouble with your audio. I have your slides queued up on my desktop. Maybe I can share the screen and you can tell me to advance when I need to. So why don't we do that? Why don't you stop sharing and I'll take over. Apologize for this, everyone, but I guess this happens occasionally. So I'm going to start with the research question 1, if you don't mind. And let me just queue it up here. Excuse me a second, everyone. Okay. Can everyone see the screen? Not yet. Hold on one second. I got it. Don't worry. Okay, everyone can see that, right?
I can see it.
Okay, let's, why don't we, I'll just go back to question 1. So just give me a moment here. Again, sorry, we knew this was going to happen someday, one of these problems. Okay. Sorry, I can't get in. There we go. Okay, take it away, Elizabeth, and just say advance or next slide, please.
Sure. So our first question kind of literally asked, is this true? So are people who are newly coming into the city, are they the ones who are disproportionately moving into neighborhoods that have received the bulk of these smart growth and public investments? Yep, next slide.
Sorry.
So to answer this question, we acquired a couple of data sources. The first one is a data source on new movers, which is from a company called Data Axle, which is a public company who sells data on people who have recently moved. So if you go to the post office and you file a change of address or you change your utilities, they collect all of this data. They sell it to advertisers. So you then get bombarded by mail on where you should get pizza in your new neighborhood. And our library also bought it. So we helped ourselves to a sample of around 70,000 people who had recently moved within the city of Charlotte limits from November of 2020 to 2022. So this is the height of pandemic times. And what we have is the exact location, so the address of where the person had moved and how far they had moved from. Okay, next slide. Next slide.
Is it? We're at the maps now. Is that okay?
Maps now, perfect. So if we just map out our new movers, so anybody in the city of Charlotte who had moved, what we see from the map A is that the highest concentration of people who had moved, as we might expect, is right in the city center where that beltway is. And so that makes sense. We want to see that this is places that have the most housing. And so we would expect to see that. That's where the highest concentration. Then in the bottom two maps, we created a variable that tried to capture places that had a relatively higher share of people coming from further away, so outside of the MSA, 200 miles or more, compared to those moving within the MSA, so moving less than 50 miles. So where do we have a relatively higher share of these out-of-town movers? And we see a slightly different spatial pattern. So we see that they're comparatively less likely to move in that crescent in the map D. And that's generally considered a crescent of poverty. That's how they talk about it in Charlotte, compared to this wedge of wealth down in the southeast. And so we see more of these long distance movers in that wedge area. Okay, next slide. Perfect. So then to characterize what are places that these new movers are attracted to, we chose two sources of data. One is this is the quality of life dashboard. These are spatial variables that the city of Charlotte publishes. So people who are moving, for example, from out of town can start to get to know the city and learn about different neighborhoods without having to visit the city itself. Or maybe before they've gone house searching, they can kind of narrow their search according to what's important to them: education, the environment, the housing, etc. Next slide. And then to complement that, we also get these property listing data. So this is data that we purchased from CoreLogic on the text of all of the real estate advertisements for the Charlotte MSA. And we aggregated it to the neighborhood level. And so we can look at what are the characteristics of what comes out of the text. Okay, the next slide. Next slide.
Oh, we're there. Correlations with all movers.
Oh, mine's still stuck on property listings. There we go. So This is just using the quantitative data, the traditional spatial data from the quality of life dashboard. And so again, if we look at all of the movers within the city, we see again what we want to see, which is that most movers are in areas where we have a higher density and a higher concentration of housing. So street connectivity, which is most high in the city center, ranks the highest and the most positive in terms of correlation. And along with other things like housing density and job density, and negatively associated with single family housing. So this is just kind of establishing that our data source is somewhat legitimate because again, it wasn't developed for this purpose. So this is just establishing this. And then we can contrast it to that variable on the next slide. Okay.
Do you need to text there? You have some animations.
But you can click next. Perfect. So we can compare that to our ratio variable, looking at neighborhoods that have a comparatively higher number of people coming from outside of the MSA. And what we see is that street connectivity falls all the way down to the bottom and different variables pop up. So the importance of the share of people with a bachelor's degree, negatively associated with people on public nutrition assistance, highly correlated with elementary school quality, white population. So we start to see a picture of higher affluence, education, high quality public schools. Another interesting one is the number of people who attend the local neighborhood school as compared to the last graph where it was negatively correlated. So comparatively less likely to be in these walkable, dense urban neighborhoods with new residential construction. Okay, next slide. Okay, and you can click again. So the next thing we do is we take all of these text. So we do what is called tokenize the words, and we use the text in a regression model. So our outcome variable is that ratio, the share of out-of-town movers to local movers. And we look at what are the most important predictors using this type of lasso or ridge regression. And so we graph here the most positive and negatively important variables. And then we have to go back into the text to find some, put them into context, because on their own, the words themselves don't make that much sense. So if we look at the word rated, for instance, it always comes up as something top rated or highly rated, usually in reference to the public schools. I'll give you a click again. Sorry, my animation seems to be out of order. Winning was also related to award-winning schools. Then we have homes that will offer somebody a healthier lifestyle, a chef's kitchen. They have butler's pantries, right? So you start to see very high-end, more suburban type characteristics. And again, schools kind of emerge at the top. Whereas negatively associated with words that give the suggestion that homes are to be remodeled or flipped, or you have to get into a bidding war with them. So multiple offers, bid, booming, handyman, studs. They're not buying homes that are currently occupied with renters, for instance, and kicking out the renter. They tend to be going to these more stable suburban type homes. I think if you click, the rest of the animations will pop in.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's fine. All right, so next one. Okay, so if we put these two sources together, we kind of have ourselves a story. So we have these long distance movers, and we know something about people who make long distance moves. So this is not shocking. People who make long distance moves themselves tend to be more highly educated. They tend to be wealthier because it's expensive to make these types of moves. But given that, we wanted to know, are there certain neighborhoods that might be disproportionately receiving them? And again, answering that question of, are they building it for these newcomers? Very literally in the sense of the newcomers. And we don't see that as much. We see that comparatively, they prefer these more highly educated populations, good schools, kind of stable, move-in ready, very nice kitchens, those types of homes, and comparatively not in higher density neighborhoods or the fixer-uppers. Okay, so next slide. So that brought up the question, well, so who are they building it for, right? This was the perception. And again, we used a very literal sense of the word newcomers, like as in just recently. Whereas the residents we were talking to were likely referring to anybody who has moved into Charlotte over the past 10 or 15 years are still considered the newcomers. Okay, so next slide. So to take a closer look, what we do with this kind of massive data set of property listings from CoreLogic. So we have longitudinal data going back from 1994 to 2020. So about 400,000 listings. And what we wanted to do was link this to link the property advertisements to data on who's moving into neighborhoods. And this comes from HMDA, which is the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, that publicly releases data annually on the race and ethnicity and income of people applying for mortgages in different neighborhoods. And so we took a focus on the role of transportation amenities and how have their advertisements played into the sorting patterns of who's applying for mortgages in different types of neighborhoods. Okay, next slide. Next slide.
It's there.
Yep.
Maybe a lag.
Sure. So the first thing we did was we classified neighborhoods based on the longitudinal nature of the HMDA data. So this is the mortgage applicant data. And we looked at race and income, and we used a growth modeling classification to kind of look at the trajectories. And I hid behind the scenes all of the hard work that goes into that. And I just present the results here. So we end up with 5 different classes of neighborhoods based on these longitudinal trends. We have high to middle income white, we have middle to low income minority turning white. So these are generally our gentrifying neighborhoods, kind of in the pink color there. We have middle to moderate income white and increasing minority. So they are out in the suburban areas. Then we have low to moderate income and minority and low to moderate income white. So on to the next slide. And so again, we wanted to focus on transportation amenities and specifically 2 different categories. So we have these smart growth types of transportation investments, and we have more sprawling characteristics. So our database of the property listings, again, 400,000 listings, tons of words, and words are really, really messy. So we needed to simplify this somehow. So we came up with different categories of transportation, so bikes, scooter, bike share, bus, driving, etc. And then we came up with a list of words that were related to those categories. And then ultimately we came up with the specific word. It's a tricky thing about working with text as opposed to numbers that you might have bike, bicycle, bikeable, biking, bikes, etc. And they're all referring to the same thing. So we came up with the words that are associated with those different categories. And then we distinguish between smart growth and sprawl. So our smart growth were walkable neighborhoods with different transportation choices, such as bike, bus, light rail. And sprawl were more auto-dominated. So these were words referring to car use, drive, highways, garages, subdivisions, or cul-de-sacs. Okay, next slide. So the first thing we can just see just by graphing up the words and how their listing is, we see that this is obviously an extremely auto-dominated city, and that comes out in the property listing. So nearly every listing mentions a car storage of some sort, carport or garage, followed by highway, and then a little bit of walkability, then drive, then a teeny bit of light rail, and an insy bit of biking and busing. So very, very little of greenways, scooters, barely registers in the property listing. So next. Then we can map out the distribution. So again, these are point level property records. So we just broke this up into hexagons, and we looked at the share of listings or the number of words per listing within these hexagons. And fortunately, we see things that are obvious. So sometimes when you use big, messy data, you want to find obvious things to make you feel reassured that this is not just leading you astray. So here we see smart growth words are concentrated in the center city, of course, along a linear corridor south, which is along the light rail line. And then some of those new urbanist neighborhoods up near Mooresville in the north of the county. And then the sprawling words are, well, sprawling. They're pretty much everywhere, but particularly, well, in the suburbs. Okay, so next slide. So now we link these two together. And so what we did was we looked at, remember, we classified the neighborhoods into these 5 different types of neighborhoods according to the mortgage lending profile of who's applying for loans. And then we looked at the share of these different words related to either smart growth or sprawl by within these neighborhood types. And what we see is the use of smart growth words kind of explodes in neighborhoods that are this green color, which is the low to moderate income minority that are turning white. So as the population is changing, the neighborhood is remaining the same. But the words then advertising in those properties start to pick up, and you see more and more mentioning of walkability, smart growth characteristics, light rail, bus, bike, as the neighborhood becomes increasingly white over time. Conversely, on the second picture, we see that the sprawling characteristics really start to pick up in neighborhoods, for instance, that are becoming more and more minority, right? So this really corresponds with that suburbanization of poverty and the increasing wealth in white population city centers. Okay, next slide. The other thing that we did was use something called a seeded topic model. So in text analysis, a topic model tries to look for latent themes within your data. The problem is when you just run the topic model without giving the computer any hints, what we found with this type of data is that it returns a bunch of gibberish, where you're trying to look at the relationship between words, but nothing obvious comes out. So what we did find was when we use a semi-supervised, and so we used the seeded model where we gave it some seeds and we said, all right, computer, we have the words walkable, bike, light rail, and bus. What are the other words that are associated with those terms? So we get smart growth, we get the words that we fed it, and then we see like these other high-end types of amenities. So private, granite, laundry, fireplace, the name of the neighborhood, island, hardwood, pantry, pool, custom, right? So you really get the feeling that these are really high-end kind of luxury amenities, whereas you feed it the algorithm, the sprawling word, you get car storage, drive, highway, cul-de-sac, hot, highway, carpet, vinyl, wood, tile, FHA loans, right? So you get sewer, concrete, much less favorable terms, potentially indicating areas of disinvestment. Okay, next slide. Next slide.
You should be there.
Summary.
Yeah, we can see it.
Anyway, so this was told us that as these smart growth terms start to be marketed in real estate neighborhoods, we start to see an increase in the income and higher end housing amenities. So we question whether smart growth is in fact a luxury amenity, while these sprawling type words are future areas of disinvestment and decline. Okay, next click. Click. And what this brings out to us are the disparities in the distribution of these public goods and investments. All right, I will try to rush through the next part if you think we have time.
Sure.
Okay.
I think we have a little time, yeah.
Okay, so then the last little bit, we wanted to focus on coming up with a kind of a new way, taking advantage of the point level nature of our data on characterizing different housing dynamics by classifying the real estate listings. And so I'm going to have you click on the next slide. So what we did here was we took a real estate listing, so the whole text in itself, and We classify it, and I'll go through the details very quickly, using an algorithm. So in the previous ones, if we want to talk a little technical, we used text analysis that treated the words very independently of one another. So it's called this bag of word model, where the word doesn't have any relationship to what came before it or what came after it. And that really limited some of the interpretability of our outputs. So in this, we wanted to take advantage of some new methods that use something called word embeddings, which learns about the context of the words and try to categorize listings based on the its position on the life cycle of the housing. So you have new housing, and that housing might age a little bit, and then it becomes prime for an opportunity, and then it might be revitalized, or it might go into kind of disrepair and become disinvested. So we wanted to look at the dynamics of housing along this life cycle continuum. All right, so next slide. So to classify the listing itself, again, we needed to, if we just tried to do this as it's completely unsupervised, the computer doesn't know anything, method, it was not giving us anything that made sense, given what we know about cities. So instead, we used a method that enabled us to influence this learning process. And so what we did was we developed 5 classes, and we wanted the housing advertisements to be assigned to either disinvestment, opportunity, new suburban, expensive investment, or renewed. And we provided it, again, a few keywords after studying extensively these lists. And it learned from those words and the surrounding context and classified each of the property listings to one of these groups. Okay, next slide. And so then we mapped those out, and this was sort of an iterative process, but we see opportunities in these that crescent that I told you down at the bottom. So again, this is how realtors are trying to position a property. We see expensive investment in that wedge of wealth. We see new suburban in those outlying areas. So this let us know that, okay, this makes sense. It's not complete trash. So next slide. So we kept going with it. And so then we divided this whole study area of Mecklenburg County into these hexagons, and we looked at the share of listings within each hexagon, because no hexagon is going to be made up of all houses classified as disinvested, new suburban, and so on. So we used the k-means clustering algorithm to come up with these different groups, saying what's the mix of housing in these different types of neighborhoods. And then, on the next slide. So we did this for each time stamp. So we aggregated them for 2-year timeframes. And so we have these different categories of bundles of housing or housing mix. And again, we used a logistic regression. So here it's going to be this class of new suburban homes based on our classification versus all of the others. And we looked at different types of coefficients. So what words go with this? So here we have this new suburban, which again are in the pink color, and these are in the outlying areas. And they have these typically suburban characteristics, cul-de-sacs, shopping, granite, master bathroom, not likely to mention things like being uptown, renovated, and so on. Okay, so the next slide. The next type of listing we have are those being advertised as opportunities. And so these, again, are closer to the urban core. These are areas where we see indicators of renovation, hardwood floors, fenced-in yard for some reason. I mean, close to uptown, of course, is a big one. And least likely to mention things like pools, schools, cul-de-sacs, and so on. So those are in the green colors. So these are the areas where realtors are more likely to mention the home as an opportunity for reinvestment. Okay, the next one. Then we have areas that have a mix of housing types. So these are transitional. So they might have, like in that picture, the giant house next to one that has not been redeveloped. So it's in the mix of things. So that's the blue color on the map, kind of adjacent to the opportunities. And we have the coefficients of the words associated with this one. Okay, next map. And we have in this wedge of wealth and up in the north along these two lakes in Mecklenburg County, we have words or housing associated with expensive investment. So here you see like gourmet kitchens, custom, school, private, but not likely to mention ranch homes or uptown. So they're again concentrated in that wedge of wealth. Okay, next one. Okay, so the reason why we went through all of that rigmarole is we really wanted to get at a kind of a micro geographic view of the space-time dynamics. So if you look at these, you divide this whole study area into these hexagons, and each one is classified into those bundle of housing types, you can see the transition from one time period to the next at a really fine spatial and temporal resolution. And so we see things which for us, you might say, why did we go through all of this work when we see things that are kind of intuitive? Well, for us, this means that the method worked out and it was pretty good. So we see that new suburban, so again, after the home is constructed, it's most likely, this is a 2-year time period, most likely to transition to, if it doesn't stay the same, to a transitional. So some of the homes might be aging, some of them might be renewed or reinvested. We have opportunities. So these are advertised as disinvestment, or they might be in this transitional where some of the homes have been revitalized and some haven't. The transitional might become new suburban if they don't stay themselves. Renewed was our worst class, so we'll leave that one there. Disinvested, well, their next likely thing is to become an opportunity, and expensive investments are very likely to remain expensive investments. But if they're not, they might go into this new suburban phase. Okay, next. Next slide.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so the point of that whole thing was we're really looking for figuring out a method. Again, we're using these very unstructured large data. Is there a way that we can study neighborhood dynamics differently than we have traditionally, which is kind of at a coarse spatial resolution using census data? So here we have this fine spatial and temporal resolution. And there really, can we start to predict now, if you start to see properties within one of these hexagons being advertised in a way that's not consistent with how it's classified currently, maybe those are the neighborhoods that are most likely to be to change in the future. So in the future, we hope to estimate maybe what are the tipping points. So if you start to see enough properties being advertised differently, maybe that's really an indicator that the neighborhood is about to change or tip. So that is our future. I think that might be the last slide. There's one more important slide. Oh, last thing are the people who've done most of the work. Now I just give acknowledgement to all of these ideas and brainstorming and work have been in complete collaboration with Isabel Nilsson at UNC Charlotte. She and I have worked on this completely together, and our wonderful PhD student, Providence Adu, who has helped tremendously as well. Voila. Okay, I think we got through it despite the technical.
Yeah, apologize for that. Really too bad. Internet's like any infrastructure, it could fail occasionally. I will say that really cool research, Elizabeth. Really interesting stuff. Wow, you really are unlocking a wealth of information that otherwise would be just embedded in these real estate ads, and it really seems to tell you a lot about the dynamics of the system that you otherwise wouldn't be able to pick up. I know a lot what you said actually confirms, but still, it's just interesting to see that come out of the way real estate is expressed in advertisements. So we don't have much time left. So I have a few questions, but maybe what we'll do is we'll jump right into the questions from the audience. Jerica, do you want to take those over?
Yeah. So for our first question, we have, is it fair to use these type of words for other cities, or is it related to Charlotte only?
Yeah, great question. So as I mentioned, we had to do a lot of fine tuning. So when you do kind of data mining or computer-based works, the computer does not have a brain. And that especially came out with this text analysis. When we use completely automated, just find the clusters, completely unsupervised, it gave us nonsense. And so what was really important, and what took a lot of time, was having this contextual knowledge of what was going on in the city. So I would say that for somebody else to do this type of work, they would need to kind of study and understand what's going on in their city to come up with these keywords and really help nudge the computer in the right direction. This is also what I'm always telling our students in this urban spatial analytics program, why you need to take these courses in understanding cities, because computers do not have brains. So we really need the connection between both the theory and what's, this local knowledge, and then the computer can do magical things.
Elizabeth, may I suggest turn your camera off because you're lagging a bit? I'm afraid we're going to have audio problems again. So, okay, please, Jerica.
And then for our next question, it says, how much local knowledge do you need to do this kind of analysis? And can this be generalized nationally?
I think nationally, again, so it's kind of same answer goes for this question as well. I think that if there were probably representative cities, I think that you could probably come up with a typology of cities that have similar keywords, probably cities that have developed around fast growing southern cities probably have a lot in common with Charlotte, whereas northeastern or older industrial cities probably have a different set of keywords. So I would imagine that if you could get some teams together from different regions who know the cities, then you can develop these kind of seeds and keywords to really hone in your analysis.
Thank you. Our next question is asking, how can we get this kind of data if we don't have the money to purchase?
Yeah, well, that's tricky. You kind of need the money at this point. For the longitudinal data, we've done some work web scraping Zillow advertisements and Craigslist advertisements. So Providence has a GitHub page. I probably shouldn't advertise this, but where you can look at his web scrapers if you want the current listings, and you could run that maybe every month. But to get the longitudinal and really look back on trends, this was the only solution we could come up with. And unfortunately, we could right now only afford the city of Charlotte unless we get some other funding to expand to other domains. So that's the bummer.
Okay, and then in our next one, it's asking data Axel data has its pros and cons. Do you have any sense of who is covered and who is not covered?
Yeah, it does have its pros and cons. So that's why we started with the map of just all movers. And we also did analysis looking at the kind of the opposite of what we did, which was the ratio of short movers to long distance. And in all three of these, we kind of saw what we were expecting, which gave us a little bit more confidence. So again, we saw that all movers were concentrated in the urban area. When we looked specifically at places where people had moved a very short distance, those were primarily in the lower income, renter-dominated neighborhoods, which is what we would expect. So if we didn't have that representation, I wouldn't expect that result to have popped out so clearly. So it seems to have gotten I think that one thing that is missing actually is international movers. And one of the reasons could be because we did it from 20 to 2022. So we had all these restrictions on movement, that they could be an underrepresented group.
Thank you. And the next one says, thank you for this talk, Elizabeth. I'm wondering what applications this may have for more equitable urban policy.
Yes, great question. So one of the questions that always comes out is, okay, well, you showed that these neighborhoods that are becoming whiter, they have all of the investments. That means that causes gentrification, right? Again, my pet peeve. And so our take home from that is that it's because we have such a scarcity of public investments. If sidewalks and walkability and buses and transit were everywhere, they were pervasive, it wouldn't be valued so highly, just because we have such a small number of neighborhoods that have those, that they're in high demand. So my policy solution would be to build this everywhere, right? Then it won't have such a high demand. It won't lead to such an increased capital investment.
Thank you. And for our next is, did you see any evidence of trends around safety or security listings bragging about security systems or other features? For example, in one neighborhood in Columbus, I've seen advertised as urban compounds. And have you seen anything similar listed in your research?
We have not. So it hasn't come up as a set of terms that pops up as the most frequently occurring. But again, we also haven't looked for it. So the other thing that we learned is to handle this big unstructured data, we really need to take a focused approach and say, okay, well, now I'm going to study crime and look at that. So it hasn't appeared as something obvious, but maybe if we sat down and looked at the listings, we might be able to find something.
I'm going to let Harvey ask a couple of questions before we end. And if we didn't get to your questions, I apologize.
Yeah, and thank you for those great questions. Despite the technical difficulties, it seems like the message got through because that was a really great slate of questions. So thank you, people, for sticking with us, and we muscled through it, I think, okay. I have a couple questions I just want to wrap up on. One question is, you're a master's, you run a master's program in what is it again? It's urban spatial analytics, yes. So I guess I would like you to talk to the students and also the professionals in the audience and say, well, you seem to be pointing your way to a new world of urban science and planning that's driven by this found geographic data or data exhaust that's just available out there. What do you talk about, like what people need to do to prepare for this type of science and planning, and also how professionals should try to continue to keep up, because it seems like this is blending a lot of things together, like as you identified, urban science, data science, machine learning. It seems like a real difficult area to work in.
I would say, well, the hardest thing I have some students who are super excited about the technical side, and I have some students who are super excited about the city planning, but kind of struggle with the technical. And what we really need to do is come together, because as I keep mentioning, just relying on the machine learning and the data side without understanding the context of the city, without understanding the theory, without trying to make sense of it, is a mistake, right? So I still stress the importance of going and reading and going old school, right? And getting to know cities and all of that. At the same time, we have to keep on top of these methods, which keep changing. But just allowing for like completely automated has been a big failure for us in these types of unstructured data when you're trying to look for something new. And again, I guess another piece of advice is to not be afraid of getting a result that's kind of obvious, right? That's a little bit reassuring, because that's the first step, making sure the data is working out, especially if data was not created for that purpose, right? So Data Axle, again, they're a public company and they're just trying to make a lot of money. So the first step is making sure that this is a representative data sample that can answer the question that you're looking for. Real listings are also imperfect. You need to start by looking for the obvious, confirming we know with the data, and then move on to the next level and try to get fancy.
So I want to ask like a research related question that's related to that. What do you think is the best way to integrate what, urban theory and what we know about cities into this type of data-driven analysis? I mean, is it just a matter of being able to interpret the results appropriately, or is there a deeper way to integrate this into these like AI and machine learning and other data-enabled methods?
Yeah, I think we've had the most success with these sort of semi-supervised machine learning approaches. So we don't have labels for some of the things we're looking at. We didn't know, but we know something about the housing market. So we know that we have new suburban homes and they might age, and we know something about the life cycle of neighborhoods, and then somebody might go and reinvest. So we came up with those labels and categories based on our knowledge of cities. And then we let the computer, after we give it some nudges, do its thing. But when we just told the computer, go ahead and find, classify these listings, when we mapped it out, it looked like a gumball machine. So there was no obvious spatial pattern. Whereas when we provided it the keywords and we provided the kind of labels, the groups that we expected it to see, it made a whole lot of sense. It was able to recreate spatial patterns that we could get from the census. So I would say without that knowledge, this would have been a failure.
Okay, we're just about out of time. So thank you very much, Elizabeth. That was really, really interesting research. Everyone, if you want to follow up with Elizabeth, I'm sure she's available for other questions, and maybe you can go to her webpage and look at some of her papers. Is this work published, Elizabeth?
It's all in various stages. We have one paper published which predates this that you check out about using scraped Zillow data. So that was in computers, environment, and urban systems. But these ones are in the process.
Okay, well, keep your eye on Elizabeth because she's doing some really cool work here in urban science. And thank you. And again, apologies for this technological issues here, but I think we got through it. And audience, thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for the great questions. And we'll see you on December 2nd with our panel on evolving community engagement in planning. See you then. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.